be reading from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night.
Good morning. Easter Sunday, and our family growing up was always the Sunday where we would get a new suit, a new tie. So you can imagine growing up, I didn't really like it that much. Don't like wearing suits, don't like wearing ties. But that was the day, we dressed up, and it was always a special Sunday because my mom is an outstanding cook. And so we'd have a really great lunch, and everyone just seemed to be in a better mood. And I'm glad to know that's just like a nationwide thing. It was so great walking in, and we had first Sunday back doing Bible classes, and there was this excitement that was in the air. It's a sunny day outside. And everyone just seems to be happy to be here, and that's great. We should be happy to be here every Sunday, but there's just something about Easter. Have you ever placed yourself in the biblical narrative before and thought that maybe you could do a better job? I don't want that to sound terrible or anything, but reading through, especially, we're doing this Bible class series on Wednesday nights called The Bible in Color, and as I'm going through these major events, I can't help but think, especially when I started off looking at the Garden of Eden and thinking about the setup that Adam and Eve had in this perfect paradise that they had, and they could eat of any tree that was in the garden except for that one tree, and I just thought, like, man, I would still be in the garden today if that was me. I would have never done that. If the woman, Janelle, if she came up to me with a fruit and said, hey, you should have this, and I would go, are you kidding me? Like, this is the tree that we were told not to eat of, and I would have been like, no. And then we'd still be in the garden right now, and it would be incredible, and you guys would all probably be in the garden too. So, you place yourself in the biblical narrative and think, I could do such a better job. Or you get to Exodus chapter 3, and you have Moses, and he's out, and he's with these sheep, his father-in-law Jethro, and this arid wilderness, and he gets to Horeb, and it's really dry, so I'm sure there were a lot of fires out there, and all of a sudden there's this bush that's on fire, and Jesus shows up, and we know it's Jesus because the text says in Exodus chapter 3 that the angel of the Lord appears to Moses. And so it's really cool to see how the angel of the Lord plays this big part in the Old Testament as Jesus is helping to shape the world for his own arrival. But anyway, Jesus comes to Moses out of the flaming bush, and the bush is not burning up, and if you want to get a man's attention, then set something on fire. And so the bush is not burning up. Moses goes to this bush, and the bush begins to speak to him, knows his name, calls him by name and says, Moses, tells him to take off his sandals because it's holy ground, and then tells him that he has this big job for him to do, to go tell Pharaoh to let his people go. And Moses is just him-hawing, beating around the bush, and he's him-hawing all around saying why he can't do it, why he's not the man for the job. And then again, it's hard not to place ourselves into the narrative and go, are you kidding me? That would have been so much easier if this was me, because if there was a bush that was on fire and was not burning up, and Jesus spoke to me out of the bush and said, Dale, I'd go, ooh, this bush knows my name. Anything that bush told me to do, I would have done. And we place ourselves in that biblical narrative and think, I could have just done such a better job. I don't understand why these people didn't act in a different way. And then you move into the New Testament, and there are several events that we could go to. But you look at Mark chapter 4, when the disciples are in the boat with Jesus, and there's this raging storm that happens. And so the disciples wake up Jesus because Jesus is asleep, and they say, Master, do you not care that we're perishing? And then Jesus says those famous words, peace be still, and the sea is calmed. And then Mark writes in Mark chapter 4, the whole question that it's aiming towards is, who is this Jesus? And the disciples basically say the same thing. Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him? What blows my mind is you get to Mark chapter 6. They've already seen this. They've already seen this power that Jesus has over the wind and over the waves. And Jesus comes walking to his disciples on the Sea of Galilee, walking on the water. And first they think it's a ghost. It's like, really? And then Peter asks to step out of the boat. Lord, if it's really you, let me step out of the boat and walk towards you. And so Peter does. He steps out of the boat, and we've got to give him kudos for that. But he starts walking towards Jesus, and then he either sees a giant wave or sees the storm around him, and he takes his eyes off Jesus, and he begins to sink, and he says, "Lord, save me." We place ourselves in the biblical narrative, and we think, we just saw Jesus calm the sea. We just saw him calm that raging storm. You're actually walking on the water. Why not keep your eyes on the person that's allowing you to do that? They should have known better. But then you kind of put it into a more practical setting. Think about all the times that maybe we've done some very dumb things that we should have known better, but we did anyway. Our bedtime was 8:30 growing up. 8:30. And it was like that for a very long time. I'm almost too embarrassed to tell you when that time changed growing up. But 8:30 on the dot. And there was one night my mom allowed us to stay up a little bit later than usual. She said we could stay up till 10. And that's a big deal, especially in our household growing up. But we blew it. That wasn't going to be happening again for a long time because we decided, me and my younger brother Carl, decided to take all of our Hot Wheels cars in bed with us. And so even after it was lights out, Carl had all his painting stuff. For some reason, he was painting on the bottom bunk. We had bunk beds. And I'm up on the top bunk underneath the cars, and I'm underneath the covers, and I'm playing with my Hot Wheels cars. And I remember hearing Mom come up the stairs, and I was like, oh. And so I threw the covers over it, and Carl shoved his paintings underneath the bed. And, we pretended to be asleep. And Mom came in and said, "Dale, do you have toys in bed with you?" And I was like, "Nope." And I forgot where I had stashed the cars. I thought I'd put them in my pillowcase. And so I was like, "Look, not here." And I lifted up this blanket. And I was like, "Not over here." And I lifted this blanket, and that was the blanket where all the cars are. So when I threw the blanket off, there's just all my Hot Wheels everywhere. And I was like, I was busted. I should have known better. I mean, come on. First of all, I lied to my mom. But then, looking back and, as I've become more wise, I thought, man, that bedtime could have changed a long time ago. It could have moved from 8:30 to 10 every night if I'd just not taken my Hot Wheels to bed with me. When you look in the Old Testament, you have all of these prophecies that are talking about Jesus. And I know it's Easter, and so a lot of congregation, a lot of church bodies are going to be talking about the resurrection of Christ. And we're going to be doing that, but we're going to look at it from a different angle this morning. But throughout the Old Testament, there are several passages and chapters that talk about how Christ is going to come and he's going to die. And that wasn't something that when we get to the New Testament, we realize that that's not what everyone expected at all. They wanted that Messiah to ride in on the horse and the sword and kick out the Romans. But throughout all of this training ground where God is training the Israelites and working with them, and God and Jesus, they're working together, and they're shaping the world for his arrival, there are several prophecies along the way that talk about Jesus and that he's going to have to come and that he's going to die. You have Zechariah chapter 13. You have Isaiah 53, which is one that's very well known. You have Psalm 22. You have Amos chapter 8. All of these predictive prophecies talking about the arrival of Jesus hundreds of years later, and that he's going to come and that he's going to die. But then when you get to the New Testament, you have these Pharisees, which still crack me up to this day. Just, I guess my imagery of them in my head is probably not very accurate at all, but they have those tassels hanging down. They put their scriptures in to be more holy, and so that they could have those scriptures right next to their forehead. They do a lot of goofy stuff like that, and they have a lot of teachings that they kind of just made up in order to prevent them from sinning. And they did. They came up with all of their own different laws and things to keep the people from even getting close to sinning. But we know that they had a different motive than just being righteous. But they are students of the law. They're students of that Mosaic law, and they completely miss who the Messiah was going to be. They completely miss who Jesus was going to be, because if they had really looked into it, and if they had really studied those prophecies, they would have known that Jesus is not going to be that guy riding in on the horse with the sword and with the crown. He's going to be someone that you're not really going to take notice of at first. He's not going to look like anything special according to Isaiah 53. And in fact, he's going to die. He's going to be that ultimate sacrifice. And they didn't make all of those connections. And it's easy for us to step back and look at that entire biblical story and say, those guys didn't know anything. I'm not a Pharisee, I'm not a scribe, and yet it seems like I know a little bit more than they do about this whole thing. But how easy it is for us to lose focus and lose sight of things even right now in our own Christian lives. There are things that we should expect as Christians. It's almost like we've been given the inside scoop. I've talked about this before, but it seems like when you watch National Geographic or Animal Channel, Animal Planet, when you watch these things and you have these very intelligent people and they're talking about these different kinds of species of animals and all these different chemicals and atoms that make up the universe, and then within the same sentence they'll talk about billions of years ago, the creation of our world. And it's almost like we have the inside scoop being Christians, knowing that there is a God, knowing that he did create the world, and we go, that's not right. The world's not that old. We didn't come from nothing. We didn't come from monkeys. We have the inside scoop. There's things that we should know, things that we should expect. But then looking down through the New Testament, and we see the plan that God has for our lives and the expectations that he has of us as Christians. And you talk about sin. The New Testament depicts sin as something that keeps us away from God and that places us in darkness if we start to walk in darkness. All of the different consequences that can come because of sin, and yet sometimes we're totally surprised at the consequences of sin. We're surprised at the emotional consequences of sin or the mental consequences of sin, and of course the spiritual consequences of sin. And we can look at people that we care about in our family or our friends or even ourselves. Maybe we've been in that situation before where we are completely and we're in darkness because of a sin problem that we had in our life, and we think, how in the world did they get there, or how in the world did I get there? Well, there's things that we should expect, and yet we're still surprised, but they happen anyway. But on a positive note, what about those answered prayers that we have? Those things, we'll pray to God and we'll ask him to intervene with something, or to be with someone who is in the hospital, or to help us overcome something. Or maybe there's this spiritual battle that we're struggling with in our life, and so we pray to God to help our faith to grow, and then God does intervene. God steps in and answers the prayer the way that we wanted him to answer. We know that God always answers our prayers, but maybe God just answers a prayer in a very powerful way for you. And sometimes we're surprised. I've been there several times, even since I've been here at Farley, when I'll pray about something, and I'll pray, and I'll pray, and I'll pray, and then God will act, and God will do something. And it's exactly what I was praying about, and sometimes just like that. And it's like the next day, God has done something, intervened, sent someone into your life, and then all of a sudden, God has your answered prayer, and you go, man, I had no idea it was going to be that quick. I didn't think it was going to work out that way. I don't know if you've had something like that happen in your life before, but I remember I was trying to go on a trip to Polishing the Pulpit in Tennessee, and our family just didn't have the money to make it that year. We had to pick between, it was a camp or Polishing the Pulpit, and I ended up going to this camp, but I regretted it because afterwards I really wanted to go to Polishing the Pulpit instead. And so I was praying about it, and I was walking down the street with my skateboard, and me and Carl were usually always hanging out, even when we were younger, not ashamed of it. But we were walking down the street, and this lady says, hey, do you need a job? Just randomly. And I was like, yeah, what do you have in mind? And she said, well, I have these dogs, and I don't have time to walk them. And so I told this lady, I was like 13 years old, and I said, I pray that God would help me go to Polishing the Pulpit. And, I don't even know if she went to church anywhere. And I was like, and then all of a sudden, you just offered me this job. And she kind of looked at me like I was a little bit weird. But she was like, well, if you walk my dogs for, this amount of weeks, then, I'll pay for your trip to go to Polishing the Pulpit. And I was like, no way. And so I went back home, and I was like, Mom, I prayed about it. God answered the prayer. I just walked down the street, and this lady offered me to walk her dogs, and now I'm going on this trip. And it was something that was so powerful that even at 13 years old, now I'm 25, and I still look back on it and go, that was incredible. Granted, I handled it in a slightly awkward way, but it was still incredible. And I'm sure that there are things like that have happened in your life where you pray, and then God intervenes, and we're still surprised. But I want to talk about something else that we should be expecting as Christians, and yet everybody's going to be surprised. Maybe we might think, well, if you have more faith or you were more connected to God, then you wouldn't be so surprised when God answers your prayers. But there is going to be a day that everybody is going to be surprised. I want to look at the reactions. So, in talking about Jesus' resurrection. So you have those Old Testament prophecies all pointing to the fact that Jesus is going to come and then he's going to die And then you have Jesus himself actually telling his disciples that once you get to the New Testament. You have Matthew chapter 16, Mark chapter 8, Luke chapter 9, and several other passages where Jesus is actually telling his disciples who he is. And he's beginning to reveal his great plan, which technically was already revealed in the Old Testament, but especially when you get to Peter. And I kind of latch on to Peter just because he's just so out there and very noisy, it seems like. He's just willing to just jump in and not think about it entirely. But Jesus reveals that plan to Peter, remember, and he says, I'm going to have to die. I'm going to be taken into Jerusalem. I'm going to be killed. And then Peter, of course, says something that I think maybe a lot of us would say. And he goes, no, you don't. You don't have to die. And maybe Peter was thinking about the times where he watched Jesus calm the storm. Someone like that does not have to die. Someone that has power over nature. Someone that has power over demons, over sicknesses of any kind. Someone with that kind of power does not have to die. No, someone with that kind of power can actually rule the world. And we know that that's one of the temptations that Satan handed Jesus when he was out in the wilderness. As Jesus is beginning that ministry, Satan takes him and shows him everything and says, look, I'll step out of the way. If you just bow down and worship me, I'll completely step out of the way. The world is yours. And I don't know if Jesus thought, maybe I don't have to die. I know that Jesus was not looking forward to that death, and it was something that weighed on him heavily, as you see in that garden scene as he's praying and as he's sweating out blood. But I wonder if Peter is connecting all of these things and saying, you don't have to die because you're God. But then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. That's not the plan. But even after Jesus tells his disciples and tells people that he's going to have to die, and he talks about that illustration with Jonah, which proves that Jonah actually happened. There was a man that was swallowed by a fish and was in that fish for 3 days. It's wild. But Jesus uses that as an illustration and says, just like Jonah was in the fish for 3 days, so the Son of Man is going to be buried in the tomb for 3 days, and then he's going to rise again. But even after he tells that plan to his disciples and to those people around, the reactions of the people that actually see him when he's risen from the dead. You have Mary, and they're running down to the tomb, and they're going down to the tomb to take care of the body in the tomb, expecting to see a body in the tomb. And you see that in John chapter 20, but then you have Matthew 28, where it says some people believed that Jesus actually rose from the dead, but then Matthew 28 gives this little bit of insight that says, but some were doubtful that that was actually Jesus, or that he had risen from the dead. And then you have Luke 24, 39 and 41, and that's the verse I want to read because I think that it really brings all of this together. Luke chapter 24, verses 39 and 41. It says, see my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And verse 41 says, while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, you have anything to eat? I love how that verse ends there. But they were in disbelief. They were overjoyed and they were marveling, but they were in disbelief, even though the Old Testament saying Jesus is going to die. And Jesus actually gets on the scene and he tells them, I'm going to die. I'm going to be raised from the dead. And everyone is still surprised. There are those that are skeptical of scriptures. In fact, there's an entire nation today that doesn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was, doesn't believe he's the Son of God, don't believe that he was the Messiah. Those are the Jews of today. But Jesus has said something else, too, in the New Testament that's going to take everybody by surprise. He said he's coming back. How many times a week do you think about that? How many times a week do you think that Jesus is coming back? I remember this time I was sitting in church and Swamp Cooler turned on, and I thought Jesus was coming back. I remember there was a time when I was standing outside, and all of a sudden this loud clap of thunder happened, and I thought, oh, Jesus is coming back. And the next day I'm eating SpaghettiOs, and I totally forgot everything. How many times do we forget? Even faithful Christians doing their best to live for God, and sometimes we forget. Everybody is going to be surprised, even though we know it's coming. Even though we know that Jesus is coming back. Maybe it's because thousands of years have already rolled by and we think, oh, well, hey, I don't think Jesus is coming back. I think a lot of the world believes that. Maybe they don't even believe in Jesus at all. But how many of us do we believe that Jesus is actually coming back? Because everyone is going to be surprised. They're going to be surprised at the suddenness. The scripture that was read for us at 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 and 2 talks about how Jesus is going to come like a thief in the night. Carl's motorcycle got stolen. Nobody saw that coming. That motorcycle thief had the nerve to steal his motorcycle and not tell my brother about it before he did it. Jesus is coming like a thief in the night. He's not telling anybody. There are those in the world today that will claim they know exactly when Jesus is coming because God told them when Jesus is going to come. Year 2000, or actually it's 1990. Yeah, 1990, 2000, 2020. Several people were saying, oh, Jesus is coming back. Jesus is not going to tell anyone. Only the Father knows. But then we also see that Jesus is going to come back in the twinkling of an eye. And you can read about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. That's an expression, the twinkling of an eye or the blink of an eye. It's going to be quick, which is very sobering when you think about the things that maybe we still have left to do on this earth, maybe things that we haven't done yet. Because I don't know about you, but the time I just blinked, there's no way that I could confess Jesus as Lord and be baptized. There's no way. There's no way that I could obey that salvation plan in the twinkling of an eye, in the blink of an eye. But also use the phrase like lightning. Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus comes back, it's going to be like lightning. Very quickly. It's going to be sudden. But for some, it's also going to be severe. It's going to be a surprise, and they're going to be surprised at the severity. In Matthew chapter 7, in verse 21, it's a very intense section of Scripture because you have all these people that seem like they had their hearts in the right place, and they were working very hard, it seems, while they were on earth, or perhaps they were just making excuses. Text doesn't really reveal that to us. But in Matthew chapter 7, you have this throne room scene. It's the final judgment, and you have people that are standing before God, and they're giving all of their excuses, which maybe for some make your hair raise a little bit on the back of your neck as you think about, oh, well, God will just understand because I'm just going to tell him this when I finally see him. And maybe we've all had those moments before and go, oh, God will understand that my upbringing wasn't exactly the best in the world, or I didn't have the best plot in life in the world. But in Matthew chapter 7, you see people that are given all these excuses, and some of them even have the ability to cast out demons in God's name or in Jesus' name. But at the end of all that, Jesus says, I never knew you. Depart from me. Some are going to be surprised at the severity, and some are going to be surprised at the suddenness. But for those that are faithful, we're all going to be surprised at the splendor. And I've talked about heaven a lot. I love talking about heaven. I know that hell is a real place. I know that hell is going to be a lot worse than people might be thinking. There's just a bunch of fire, a guy with a pitchfork and a little weird tail. That's not anything like the biblical description of hell. But for those that have been living faithfully, when we actually see the splendor of heaven, even though we've read the Bible verses about what heaven is going to be like, even though there are all these different theories about what heaven is going to be like, and they'll throw out, there's going to be a river, and the tree of life is going to be there. And I believe that there's scriptural evidence that backs that and gives us a tiny glimpse of what heaven is going to be like. But just based on the biblical writers and their attempts to describe heaven, tell us a lot right there. As John the Revelator, as he sees a lot of these things unfolding before him, he keeps throwing out that term as if, or it's like. It's like glass, or it's like gold. It's like, because he can't even put into words what he's actually seeing. And Paul just kind of glazes over it, and he goes, I was caught up in the seventh heaven, and I don't really know what happened entirely. He didn't even try and explain the things that he saw. For those faithful Christians, when we finally see heaven, we can actually be there. We are all going to be surprised at the splendor of heaven. We're all going to be surprised. It's a beautiful day outside. Yesterday, it was really great too, and I was working in the garage with my wife, and I just stepped out into the driveway and just stood there in the sun. I was like, oh, it feels so good to actually have sun and not chilly coldness, which no one told me about. It's going to be here in Alabama as well. Coming from Colorado, I thought I lived in the coldest place on earth. It's actually colder here in ways than it is in Colorado. But even that sun and even that great day and those great moments are not going to compare to the splendor that's coming. Everyone is going to be surprised on that day. Is it going to be a good surprise, or is it going to be a bad surprise? We have a long history in our family of scaring people. It's kind of a tradition, which apparently Janelle did not share with my family. And she doesn't like being scared. I love scaring her. And so I'll stand there sometimes, and I'll just kind of like look at her, and that will creep her out. Like just standing there and looking at her. If I look funny at her, then she'll be creeped out. She does not like to be surprised like that. Everybody's going to be surprised. It doesn't matter if you are thinking or constantly thinking about the coming of Christ. When Christ actually appears, everybody's going to be taken off guard in some ways. But for those that are prepared for that coming, that great day, for those that are prepared, living faithfully, you're going to be surprised. You're going to be surprised maybe in the moment that it happened. You're not expecting it. You're eating potato salad or something. You didn't expect God to come right then, but you were prepared for it. You're ready for it. But for those that aren't ready, it is going to be a very terrifying day. And it's going to be a day when they're going to realize, I should have just done. We began this lesson talking about that biblical narrative. Well, if I was there, I would have done this. It's so tragic to think about that there is going to be, for many, many people, an entire eternity of them thinking, I should have just done fill in the blank. I should have just followed through with that plan of salvation. Every Sunday, every time I heard those sermons or those Bible classes or those devos or those opportunities that I had to actually respond and do something about it, and I never did it. All of eternity to think about that. It's a great day. It's Easter. It's a good marker if you have a terrible memory like me. Easter is a good day to just kind of have that mentally in your mind of the day that you turn things around. Maybe you've been thinking about becoming a Christian for a while and something's holding you back. We're not promised tomorrow. We're not promised the next hour. But if this is the day for you, if this is something you've been thinking about for a while, then why not make that change? Why not be immersed in the waters of baptism just as Jesus was buried and then rise again a new creature just as Jesus rose from the grave? If this day is for you to make that change, then why not do it? But if there's something that's keeping you from Christ or keeping you or making you unprepared for that last day because of some sin problem or something in your life that you need to take care of, then let today be that day for you. If there's something that we can help you with or pray for you about, then why not come as together we stand and as we sing.